Hello everyone and welcome to Hocus Focus, where we're keeping Sunday strange with me, Sara Mondaini.
And me, Thomas Sheridan.
Yeah, and we're at episode number 8 this week and they are completely flying by. I can't believe it. We will be in double figures soon.
Yeah, except that it is amazing how quickly it happens, how they build up right away.
Yeah, and thank you for the comments and the shares as always. The response to last week's show was fantastic and we do appreciate it. So keep commenting, they do get read, keep sharing and keep tuning in.
And thank you for sending us your location reports and helping to promote your own channel as well. We've had 2 fantastic ones so far, so thanks to those people for doing that. And if you want to do it yourself, contact me or Sarah and just tell us what you have to offer. Once it's under 5 minutes.
Okay, so let's get stuck into tonight's first topic, which is the tarot. Now, the earliest reference to the tarot date from the mid-1400s in the Italian cities of Venice, Milan, Florence and Urbino. And you might be surprised to know that it didn't start out as a divination tool, but it was actually a pack of playing cards to play games such as the tarocchini, which are a point trick-taking card game, I think similar to bridge, and they were very popular in northern Italy. And then the cards were then said to spread across Europe, which led to a family of card games that could be played with the tarot cards. And the cards were also a status symbol, and often the aristocracy would have them designed and painted by their own personal artists. Now, the tarot's association with the occult and cartomancy didn't start until the 1800s, and it had absolutely nothing to do with the tarot from the medieval time. The tarot card games operate by a distinct set of rules, and the major and minor arcana were only used or are only used in esoteric practice of the tarot, and the word arcana means secrets. So the cards of the major arcana refer to spiritual matters and important patterns in the questioner's life, and the minor arcana, such as the wands, deal mainly with business matters and career, and the cups are dealing with love and emotions, and swords deal with conflict, and coins or pentacles deal with money and material comfort. Now, the 3 most common decks used in esoteric tarot are the Tarot of Marseille, the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck, and the Thoth tarot deck. And the major arcana is a 22 card set within the tarot. It's considered to be the core and the foundation for the deck. Or the deck is filled with the archetypal significance, but this is mostly found within the major arcana. Now, another thing about the major arcana is these cards tell a story called the Fool's Journey, and it's the story of humanity's spiritual evolution into enlightenment. The Fool card represents each of us as we begin our journey of life, and he's a fool only because he's a simple soul with the innocence and faith to undertake such a big journey with all the hazards and pain. And at the start of the trip, he's considered a newborn. He's fresh and he's open and spontaneous. And he has his arms held high and he's ready to embrace whatever comes his way. But he's also oblivious to that cliff edge that he's about to cross. And the Fool is aware of any hardships he'll face as he ventures out onto his new experience and lessons of the world. Now, he goes on this journey through the major arcana and he eventually re-enters through the World card at the end of the major arcana. But this time, when he comes through at this card, he has a more complete understanding and he's integrated all the different parts of himself and achieved wholeness. And he's reached a new level of happiness and fulfillment. And the Fool experiences life as full and meaningful, and the future is filled with infinite promise. And in line with his Dharma, he becomes actively involved in the world and he gives service by sharing his unique gifts and talents. And he finds that he prospers at whatever he attempts. And because the Fool acts from inner certainty, the whole world conspires to see that his efforts are rewarded and his accomplishments are many. Now, while many people believe that the tarot will tell you the future, making predictions are not really what the tarot cards are about. The most powerful way to read the tarot is to use the cards to access your intuition and your inner wisdom. And the imagery in the cards give you instant access to the subconscious mind and your intuition.
Yes, that's how I don't believe. Well, I'm not saying I don't believe it, but I don't use the cards for divination. I see it as a way of working through problems. I believe I take the very much the Jungian aspect to it, but I suppose in a way it is a kind of divination. If you can use the symbols on the cards to help solve a problem or a stage in your life, well, you're kind of like predicting your way out of it. You're giving yourself a path out of it. It's because you can actually see the concepts as pictures. It works with the lower poles of cognition and targets your lower mind, your subconscious mind directly, because your subconscious mind is much older than your conscious minds, and it deals in the world of symbols and art and science and so on. The tarot's origin is a contentious one. I tend to believe, with a now very unfashionable thing, that it originated in India. And there is and the gypsies, who are actually the European gypsies, the Roman gypsies, they originally came from northern India, from a place called Taru, and they made their way into Italy in the 1400s. I think it's not just a matter of, a story, but there's also the archetypes in the cards. They seem to have carried all the spiritual and psychic archetypes from all over Europe within the deck. For instance, if you look at the emperor, he's dressed like a czar, so that would have been an encounter with Russia. It's in a tarot, they must say now, the original deck. And then if you look around, you have Thor represented in the tarot card. You have the Wheel of Fortune, Fortuna. You have Temperance in the Strength card. You have all these other archetypes from all over Europe, from the Slavic world, the Nordic world, and the Italian classical world, and they all seem to have found their way into southern Italy. Around the same time, there were stories about where the Gnostics were still existing as a secret sect, and the whole thing of the secret mystery schools and all this thing that was very commonly taken root in Italy. What's your mark? I don't think there's absolutely zero evidence to say they came from India. Sorry, not from India, from Egypt. This whole thing of Thoth and all this stuff. There's no evidence for that at all. That's just kind of like, I don't know where that even developed from. But there's a lot more evidence that it came via India, because it even has Vedic archetypes. You have the chariot, for instance. That's a very strong element within Indo-European culture. Within Vedism, you have that famous dialogue in the Bhagavad Gita between Arjuna and Krishna in the chariot, and the chariot is in the tarot. You have the death card represents many of the same things by Kali. That represents the archetype of the goddess Kali, and so on. And the secular nation of it is very pagan at the time that Europe was very Christian. So it's bringing in this Indo-European Vedic thought. There's also a book that was published in the 1800s called The Tarot des Bohèmes, and it was later a very good case that it did come with the gypsies from India. And although in recent years that's been discounted, but I think a lot of it has to come from the fact that the historians tended to focus on the cards as being playing decks rather than divination decks, that's what they came from. But in terms of the spread of the tarot, it's quite remarkable. It went all over Europe very quickly. It was first documented in Italy in the 1400s. By the 1500s, it was already well known in England, so it traveled right across Europe. And in the military museum here, they have a tarot deck in one of the exhibitions from the 1600s, and Irish soldiers were carrying tarot decks with them, both to play the game and probably other things as well. So the tarot is a far more integrated thing into human life than it's given credit for. And I always made the joke that there's much more to the tarot than divination, or someone pretending to be a gypsy at the seaside telling some woman that she's going to marry a millionaire or a footballer or something. There's much more to it than that. Although I have nothing against that, because that can be fun. That's just fun. I myself use the top deck. I've gone through just about all the decks, and I always come back to this one. There's two reasons for it. I really like the 1940s comic book style the artwork inside that I really liked, by Lady Farida Harris, and I also like the fact that the cards are a nice, comfortable, small size. They're very easy to shuffle and put on a small table. And there is a larger size one you can get. That's okay for enjoying and studying the art, but I wouldn't get it for actual working with them. But in terms of using the tarot, what kind of spreads would you favor, Sarah?
I like the 3-card spread, and for myself, because I use it to get insights into situations and people around me. I look at the cards and symbols to look into stuff that I wouldn't have thought of on my own, like, you know, trying to bring something out of my head and into the surface. Like if you've got a challenge or you're out on the edge of a breakthrough or something and you can't quite find the key to resolve something, I use it for that. So I do like using the 3-card spread or just pulling a card. And I do play around with the Celtic cross as well.
Yeah, some of the spreads are a bit ridiculous. There's some that have like 20-something cards in it. Sure, you could come up with any combination of stories with that. I think the most effective ones are the less cards, the better. That's how I feel about it, because that causes you to focus and concentrate, and you'll tend to see things that are everywhere in a big spread of cards. I go for a 7-card spread. I came up myself, and I actually wrote a book years ago called Tarot Psyche on the tarot, and so you know, again, I see it as a tool for unleashing the powers of the subconscious. It's great for artists. It's great for writers. It's great for just seeing the world in a different way. And in terms of divination, it's just not for me. But I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it and anything like that. But I do absolutely love the tarot, to be honest. It's been a very enhancing and enriching thing in my life.
I've brought a couple of decks here to show you. I've got several decks. I try not to get stuck on one. I try to use them all, but I do like the artwork of Pamela Smith of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and I've got 2 sets of the Rider-Waite-Smith.
That's an important factor. It's a good hobby collecting it and enjoying the artwork. That's another aspect of the tarot. You can just enjoy it as an art book.
I've got the 2 of the Rider-Waite. I've got one that's based on the original drawings of Pamela Coleman Smith, and I've got another version which is the more cleaned up version where the images are sharp. I don't know if you can see the difference there.
The colors are less monotone and more gradiated.
Yeah, now I like these vintage looking ones better.
Like a poster. It's like an old poster art.
Yeah, but when I was learning the tarot, I used the sharper pictures because you could see more.
I think that's called the Radiant Rider-Waite.
Right. I've had them years, so I don't have the boxes anymore. And then I have this collector's item here, and this is called the Keymaster Tarot. Now this is made by an artist friend of ours called Lorenzo Gaggiotti, and it's a beautiful set, and it's actually based on playing cards. I'll just show you a few. So we've got absolutely amazing artwork here. And you've got the gold leaf on the side, and this gold leaf is throughout the pack. So you've got the tower there, and the magician, and then we have what we would normally have: the cups, swords, and wands and pentacles. The playing card suits, yeah.
But in the tarot, that would be the Le Bâton.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's just beautiful. And I use these when I want to pull something out of my own mind, you know, my own subconscious, because they're called the Keymaster. So they're the Keymaster to the subconscious. So these, for me, these are the key to my subconscious. So if I want to, if I'm feeling a bit creative and I've got a mental block, I'll have a look in here, I'll pull something out. Or if I want to get a bit more insight into a situation that I just can't get my head around, I'll pull one of these out, and they're an absolutely beautiful deck. And I think there was only 1 of 200 of these made in the whole world. and the guy is one of the pioneers in the field of playing cards and tarot cards in Italy. So
you've got a real collector's item there.
A real collector's item, yeah. So yeah, and then obviously you've got the fluffy tarot sets, which I don't have any of those. You know, your Doreen Virtue type tarot and fluffy unicorns and rainbows. I can't resonate with those. I just can't work with those at all. I prefer the dark.
I can't work with the ones that are too pretentious or self-conscious. Like there's tarot cards that are very overtly, what's the word? Topical. That's the word. No, I need something that still refers me back to, and archetypally and visually to the tarot, they must say, in some way, in some format, at least. Even though you have someone like the top deck is quite out there in some of the artwork, like the Fool here. A very interesting tidbit is that Crowley originally, and it was done, had Groucho Marx from the Marx Brothers as the original Fool in his deck, because he was a huge fan of the Marx Brothers movies, and the Moon card as well. But they still harken back to the Rider-Waite one, especially the Sun card. But I can't do anything that's too out there, that's too formulaic, away from specific to a topic. Like you have things, there's even things like the Miami Vice tarot and things like that. There must be tens of thousands of decks over the years. But yeah, that's a beautiful one. That one. I was in an occult bookshop in Sheridan, and they had some fantastic decks there on sale, and I didn't see that one, but like that similar idea with the gold leaf on the edge, and the even some had gold embossing on the cards themselves.
Yeah, these do as well. They've got some gold embossing on the cards, on the front of the cards. I don't know if you can see it with the light there.
I can see it on the and it's also got a gold lining on the edge.
Yeah, and on the backs as well. They're absolutely beautiful.
That's really classy.
And they're not whimsical, and they can be quite dark, so each card, they got the devil card there. It's well represented with the colors and everything. They don't try to, he doesn't try to fluff it up or make it look like a nice positive thing. It is what it is. It's the devil card there. Beautiful.
That's good, the approach, because I don't do inverted readings. I don't, because all cards have positive and negative attributes. And when you lay the spread out in front of you, then you get the story. A book isn't made up of one page.
Yeah.
And life isn't binary. It isn't all good and all bad.
Yeah, that card could have so many different meanings depending on what card is in front of it or behind it. There's lots of possibilities what that card could mean, but people just see it's the devil there and they get afraid of it. Same with the death card, isn't it? And the tower card.
Yeah, but also, the devil card deals with addictions and irrational behavior. Now, that's interesting because that's very much a gender-based card with a man and a woman. In this age, when we're told that genders don't exist, where does that lie? Well, it lies in the devil in the middle, in irrationality and confusion, chaos, and addictions.
Yeah, the man and the woman in that card are the characters from the Lovers card.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The relationship has become bondage. That's like if the Lovers card, you see, if you work through the hero's journey, the Lovers card means a commitment to a relationship and settling down. But by the time you get to the devil card, you have to make the decision: am I just here because I'm supposed to be here? Am I going? The love is gone. Now the real test comes in. The chemical romance is gone. Now the real test comes in for you.
And it's interesting as well because they're in chains there, but their arms and the hands aren't chained, so they can undo those chains and bondage at any time. So it's almost like it's a self-inflicted.
It's psychological.
Yeah.
There's loads of that kind of thing in the tarot. There's loads of that kind of thing. Of this. There's you have things where you have like I think it's the 7 of Cups. Is it? Oh, the 5 of Cups, where somebody who's fed up and they are on a road. So the choice is to walk away instead of like do something new. That's what I'm saying about. There's always something good and bad. The Hanged Man. Now that's one I was talking about earlier on about the gypsies picking up archetypes from all over Europe. That's Odin. That's absolutely Odin. 100%. That's suffering, wisdom through suffering. Dionysius as well. See that there's good and bad in all of them. In the moon card, the crustacean or the creature at the bottom represents a subconscious mind constantly coming up. You cannot escape natural law. If you repress something into the subconscious, it will explode to the surface in madness, neuroses. But of course, it'll reach you in nightmares. And first, it will reach you in nightmares. If people only knew how fantastic tarot is, and how useful it is. Did you ever see the top tarot card? It's destruction by fire. It has the all-seeing eye, but the all-seeing eye at the top is representing that wisdom, that this has to be destroyed. This is not something that can be held. It must be destroyed, and the tower must fall all the time. Now the 10 of Swords is cruelty in the top deck. That's usually shown in the right way. There's a man on the ground with a bunch of swords in his back. But if you look at that, that's a card of rebirth, because the worst is now over. And in the Rider Waite deck, the sun is shining in the background. It's not shining, rising up in the east, meaning the day is beginning again. My favorite card of all is the Rider Waite illustration of the star, because the star has so much beautiful. You have, the Aqua Nostra being retrieved at the end of the night of the darkest shadows, the torment. Lucifer is in the sky giving wisdom. A nightingale is singing on a tree to remind you that you will survive. And she's now pulling the Aqua Nostra out of the water, the new water to begin again. The dew from that's again another pagan thing they picked up along the way. The dew from the honeysuckle on May Day, on Beltane's Eve, Beltana's Eve. Yeah, you see the thing with that one is that's I'm glad you showed me that, because there's cards are very much gender specific. If my contention is if a woman draws that card, it directly affects her. But if a man draws that card, he's doing that to a woman. He's holding her in bondage against her will. And but also the swords are behind it and not in front of her, so she can walk out. She's been, again, very similar to the devil card. She's being held by her own neuroses. That's actually a very bad card for women to get. It often it represents pretty negative things that's going on in a woman's life. And where a man, you'll find like a card like the Seven of Swords, it represents in a man, he didn't get away with it, but often in a woman, it represents she did get away with it. The guy stealing the swords in the camp. So it's there. It's a very unpolitically incorrect, unwoke thing to do today. But the cards definitely are gender specific. Look at the Ace of Cups. That can be pregnancy. That can be, menstruation. That can be very feminine things. Very feminine things. Regarding a man, that could be like a maternal or a blossoming thing or something like that. So, or even a gay man might get that card a lot. I mean, we could sit here all night. Justice or the Judgment card, right? Or remember, this is karma. Depending on, this is either karma being delivered or karma being given. And when it represents things like legal contracts and so on, you're being told to actually really be very careful about what you do on that. To make you think about it. The Ace of Coins, again with money. This is actually considered the best card in the tarot deck, certainly by the Rider Waite and Alice Bailey's version of it. That it means that you're getting great success in what you're doing, and great fortune. It's also in couples represents engagements, or someone giving you something for nothing. But if this can come with a card that could be like, say, I'm trying to think. It could come with a card, yes, something like the Seven of Swords. It could mean that, okay, you're taking this gift of money or this gift of something, but it might come with a proviso that you're expected to do something for it, okay? So, you may be asked to sell your soul to get that money, that kind of thing. You see, you cannot read a card in isolation, yeah, other than for a certain, like a specific thing, but in terms of an overall reading.
I like this card, the Seven of Swords.
I can't see. Yeah, well, he's run away from the camp. He's left some behind. He stole the swords. Now, in a male, that generally means you're not going to get away with it, but in a female, it does. It often does. Like, so if you pull the fast one, or you tried to get out of a sticky situation, in a male, it generally means failure. It's also because due to hubris. I got away with it. Screw them. And then you trip up and they catch you.
Yeah. Just one last one. This is one of my favorites as well, because it just shows you that you've got all the tools that you need to do what you need to do, and as above and so below is showing there. So you imagine it, you think it, you bring it down, and then you do action, and you use your tools to create what it is that you want to create, and bring it into being. And
in the hero's journey, it's also the card of independence. You develop a sense of biodynamic awareness where you're actually generating yourself. You're responsible for your growth. You've moved on from your parents. So it represents also that adulthood and the moving away from adolescence and having the skills and abilities to make of life. I'll show you one more. The Two of Swords, the peace card. It represents a truce that's brought about, that's fragile. So it's peace, but it's peace with tension behind the scenes, warning you that this peace must be kept or it will very easily fall asunder. And you get the Tower from that. Okay, and to wrap this segment up, the World card, completing the 22 cards of the major arcana. It's called the Universe in some decks. It represents the completion of the cycle to begin again. And it's very much a very pagan concept. The cycle has been completed in terms of a kind of a wave function, if you want to use that terminology, or a cycle that's over. But remember, it's secular. The Fool begins again.
In this week's edition of Folk Horror Cinema, we've gone for another classic haunted house horror film from the golden age of horror films, the 1970s. And this week, we are reviewing the 1976 film called Burnt Offerings, starring Oliver Reed, Karen Black, and Bette Davis. The film's directed by Dan Curtis, and it won 6 awards in 1977. And it's about a family called the Rolfe family, and they move into a very affordable priced mansion, which was available to rent during the summer. And the parents, Marion, played by Karen Black, and Ben, played by Oliver Reed, their son David, played by Lee Montgomery, and Ben's aunt Elizabeth, played by Bette Davis, they try to settle in, but strange things start happening. Now, there's a Roz and Arnold Allardyce, and they are the eccentric owners of this big mansion, and they move out in the summer so that the house can repair itself. And one of the conditions of the stay is that the Rolfe family must look after the Allardyce's elderly mother, who lives in her quarters upstairs. She never leaves her room. She just needs a plate leaving out 3 times a day and she'll be no bother. And the film starts almost as a light-hearted camp comedy, and it builds up into an atmospheric haunted house horror film. And it doesn't take long for Marion to become glamorized by this house, and she starts putting the house's needs before that of her own family. Betty Davis and Oliver Reed work together, and it's a real treat to see them both on screen. And she plays his elderly aunt, and she's full of life, and she enjoys a good laugh. The opening scenes and the closing scenes are poles apart. I don't want to give too much away for those that haven't seen it, but it is a creepy movie of unseen supernatural forces that are darker than you first imagine. It's got a taste of The Shining, even though The Shining didn't come out until 4 years later. But it's got that same kind of isolation, desperation in a big old building in the middle of nowhere. And there's lots of suspense and a great all-star cast, and it really works.
Yes, I have not seen this film until recent years, and I was amazed by that it passed my radar. I think it's the best haunted house film yet made. The thing is that it was made by a TV director, and he had made a TV show in America called Dark Shadows, which was a kind of a daily soap opera or a weekly soap opera, I think, set around gothic ideas and stuff in his town in Maine. And it looked like a TV movie, Burnt Offering. So I think that didn't help it in the cinema because it didn't look like a cinematic movie. But that doesn't, in anything, that actually helps because it actually brings you right up to the characters. Had an awful lot in common with The Shining, an awful lot in common with the Amityville Horror, and an awful lot in common with the film we recently reviewed, The Horror of the Hell House, of the concept of the building being a conscious entity that possesses people and takes them over. But this one actually has a much cleverer twist on it, on that whole story, that actually shows that the house is doing, I'm not going to tell you why, that the house is doing it for reasons other just to spook people out. It actually is doing it for a practical reason. Oliver Reed plays a character I've never really seen him play in either film. He's often kind of like a bit simpy and wimpish and a bit kind of, he's not the assertive male he normally plays. And Karen Black clearly wears the trousers in their relationship. But the kid was also the young boy, the one who played the young boy. It was fantastic, especially at the end when he basically he's the last character we see in the film, and it's quite shocking at the end. There's some fantastic stunts, the special effects, like our old-fashioned stunts, and there's one stunt that the stuntman does at the end that's I just can't. If he was paid $1 million, he wasn't paid enough. And then even Bette Davis is great in it, and that's a seriously all-star cast considering it wasn't a big movie at the time. It was one of those movies that people said, it's okay. But for me, Sarah, the thing that will always stand out in that movie will be that grinning chauffeur, the driver, the guy driving that was representing this demonic entity that's working on behalf of the house, and appears in dreams and actual real scenes. And the actor didn't really have to do much except smile, but that was the thing that gave me the willies most of all, was that grinning driver, and it had a kind of a Men in Black kind of vibe to it, but absolutely terrifying. My theory of the film is, and I'm not giving away the end, is that the people involved in it are a cult around the house, and they're not looking after the aunt, they're looking after the house. The house is almost like the demon they're servicing.
Yeah, it was a great film, and there's an old saying, isn't there? Evil wears a smile, and that chauffeur had a permanent grin on his face.
And the dark sunglasses and the dark, I actually drew him. Because I mean, you asked me that was the first thing that came to mind when you mentioned the film last week. I had to draw him. But, yeah, because that was the thing that stood out for me. The thing is too that apparently when the film was made, Karen Black and Bette Davis did not get on. They were fighting all the time, so that probably helped with the tension that was kind of there. And also the film represents the concept of the American dream, the perfect family being consumed by the perfect house, almost like the American dream eating them alive. You know, to have the best, the most fabulous house in the neighborhood at any cost, even if it kills you. They play the subtext plays on that too. Oh, it's a fantastic film. If there's any criticism at all, it's I'm not a great fan of that TV movie style of cinematography, but it doesn't distract from it. I think if that had been made by a film director and he made it look like a movie, I think it would have been an Oscar winner. It would have been, you know, that level of but unfortunately, in the past, when it came out, it was not well received, though apparently audiences loved it. And it's now considered, like, you know, when they have this thing, they have retrospective reviews, that now it's looked upon as a classic.
That ending, though, it just leaves you like, what? You just can't believe that ending, because it was a very suspenseful film all the way through, and then all of a sudden it just hits you in the face, and it's what? Can't believe that's wow.
It reminds me of the ending of the same shock value that the ending of the Friday the 13th, the first movie, had, when the boy's corpse came out of the water. It reminded me of that impact. It's like suddenly this film that's not, well, it has a few scenes like the chauffeur pushing the coffin at them and stuff like that. But in terms of like, when Oliver Reed tries to drown his son in the pool, yeah. that was a quite disturbing scene. He's becoming slightly possessed, but that ending, it just came out of left field, and it's like when the film's over with that final freeze frame, you're like, you really have to get your breath back.
Yeah, it's that ending that makes it play on your mind for a few days afterwards as well, because you just keep replaying that. Well, I kept replaying it in my head, like, whoa, just can't get that out of my head.
Yeah. So go out there and see it, and you'll understand why we didn't give you any spoilers. Burnt Offerings, fantastic masterpiece. And like, quite rightly, as Sarah said, from the golden age of horror cinema, in America anyway, the 1970s. In the north of England, near the city of Preston, lies the village of Walton-le-Dale. Located on the banks of the River Ribble, once the site of a major Roman fort, Walton-le-Dale derives its name from the Old Saxon term of wall or tun, meaning farmstead. The location was also the site of some important battles during the English Civil War, culminating in the Battle of Preston in August 1648 between Cromwell and the Duke of Hamilton. However, from a Fortean point of view, Walton-le-Dale is world famous within occult circles as being the location where Irish alchemist and the channeler of Enochian magic, Edward Kelly, is said to have spoken to devils and then raised the dead man's corpse from the churchyard in order to find out the future fate of a local landowning gentleman. Some versions of the story, mainly as a result of this famous illustration, also included Dr. John Dee, court astrologer to Queen Elizabeth I, on location during this late-night necromancy. Regardless of if Dr. Dee was there with Kelly or not, the legend is very much rooted in actual history. Within A Comprehensive History of the Location by John Weaver, he related a tale told to him firsthand by a servant who claimed to have witnessed the events himself, and by the gentleman in question whose future was being divined. This is generally regarded to have been Thomas Langton, Lord of the Manor of Walton-le-Dale. The story tells of how a servant first went with Edward Kelly to speak to a demon in Walton Park, and then both to the churchyard of St. Leonard's so as to raise a dead man and make a demon speak through him. Using the walk-in to find out what might happen to Thomas Langton in the future and when he would die. Following several incantations by Kelly, the corpse revealed the future fortune of the Lord of the Manor, and the matter was never spoken again by any of the parties present on the night, so as to avoid witchcraft charges. This might suggest that John Dee was indeed present, and considering his closeness to the Tudor court, his name was held in the highest secret of all. Within demonology, an entity or demon is placed into the body of a dead person, and because demons are not subject to the same space-time as the normal human consciousness, they are able to go into the future and witness events yet to come. Remarkably, most historians consider the event to have actually happened, as all the main players, their existence and connection to this story can all be confirmed. Whether or not the necromancy was successful is up to one's personal judgment. Mainstream historians write it off as an opportunist hoax played by Kelly. However, the more occultic inclined among us are more than aware of Kelly's spectacular achievement in bringing forth the Enochian language in completion to the point whereby it was documented and verified by Dr. Dee himself. The churchyard at St. Leonard's today generates an atmosphere which only adds to the authenticity of the accounts of what took place on that fateful night in Elizabethan Lancashire. This is Thomas Sheridan at St. Leonard's Churchyard in Walton-le-Dale, Lancashire, England. Our second topic for the evening is a cryptozoology one. But is it? And I'm going to challenge that assertion. And we're dealing with, of course, the Loch Ness Monster, the probably most famous cryptid of them all, probably more famous than the Mothman of the Yeti. Now, the Loch Ness Monster, as you know, appears in Loch Ness, a gigantic lake in the north of Scotland that exits the sea at the Inverness into the North Sea. This is where it gets contentious. The Loch Ness Monster has been seen, recorded-wise, only since the last 100 years or so. Prior to that, there was only one, and it was not a proper sighting. St. Columba, or St. Columkill, as he's known in Ireland, went to Scotland and exorcised a serpent from the mouth of the River Ness, and where the River Ness meets the ocean, meets the sea. So he was not in Loch Ness proper. And that was always used as the thing to say, oh, the stories go right back to St. Columba. They don't. That was in a very different place. It was in the River Ness at the sea. And the serpent may well have been something like a basking shark, or a regular shark, or a whale, or something like that. Or using the same allegory as St. Patrick and the snakes, represented the pagan tradition of the area, and the sea serpent represented perhaps maybe a veneration of the Celtic sea god Manama MacLear, who was venerated in Scotland as well as Ireland. And so, we can't assume, well, I actually know for a fact that it was not, the St. Columba sighting did not actually happen as a Loch Ness Monster sighting. There has been definite confusion. In the 1930s, there was a rash of sightings, and that can be explained by an elephant. There was elephants that were in a circus that was touring the area, and the elephant keeper used to take the elephants down to Loch Ness to give them a swim in the lake. Now, that was the trunk sticking out of the water, was probably what people thought was the long neck of the monster. And then there was other sightings, other photographs. There was a famous research case in the 1970s where they did take a photograph of what appeared to be a large fin of a dinosaur type creature. So we're left outside the things of it being something like basking seals or basking sharks coming in from the sea. We're left with two things. Well, one, if you're a cryptozoologist, that it is a remnant of the dinosaur age, some subaquatic dinosaur that still lives in the lake and it survives down there. Highly unlikely, and I'll tell you why. Even though that fin picture was convincing, we would have got way more than this by now, way more. And also, that picture is still quite vague and fuzzy, and it's hard to tell the size of it too. I would be more for my own personal thing to believe that the monster was created as an elemental by none other. He's back, Aleister Crowley. When he went there on the banks of Loch Ness we bought a cottage to perform the Abamelum the Mage, the brutal magical ritual to basically open the gates of the abyss. He involved all kinds of things like starvation and taking laxatives and getting up and taking cold showers and sleep deprivation and all kinds of other physical extreme tortures and so on, sex, magic, masturbation. He cut the ritual short and was called away by MacGregor's mattress over the matter regarding the Golden Dawn. He left the ritual half unfinished, and this is my theory now, this elemental force he brought through has been trapped in the lake ever since. And this for me explains why there's no decent photographs. The best photographs have been shown to be fakes, or they admitted that they're fakes. But the Loch Ness monster, listen to me, it's real, but it's a disturbance in the water caused by some elemental being. And this is why when cameras, it's seen all the time, it's videoed all the time, it's photographed all the time. But when they zoom in, just like the UFOs, they see nothing. It dissolves the image the closer you get because it's a disturbance in the field. And that's my theory about the Loch Ness monster. It exists, but I do not believe it's an ancient dinosaurs or species of dinosaurs trapped in the lake. It is possible that large whales could get into the lake through undersea caves, but the River Ness on its way from the sea to Loch Ness is very, very shallow. So there's no way a whale could get through that, or some large sea serpent, if such a thing exists. There'd have to be caves under the sea. But Loch Ness itself is an ideal place for it. It's not very well populated there. It's a very, very large, very long lake, very, very deep. And if anyone is responsible for the Loch Ness monster, it's our old friend, the Beast 666 himself. How do you feel about it, Sarah?
Well, the area of Loch Ness itself has a long history of claims of strange phenomena and incidents, including UFOs and Men in Black encounters, alleged witnesses to shape-shifting and demonic encounters, ghosts and fairies, all predating the sightings of the monster that's made it famous. And across from Boleskine House is a graveyard with a reputation for strange activity as well. And that was established long before Crowley arrived at the location and was linked with stories of witchcraft. And obviously Crowley knew this, and that's what attracted him to the area. And I think he considered Boleskine House to be some kind of a focal point for energies and making it a kind of shrine, for want of a better word, for performing magical rituals. And it's not far from the loch, and water is a really powerful medium or amplifier for spectral and paranormal activities. So yeah, I am of the mind that this thing was brought into being in this realm through some magical ritual that he did. He didn't close it down properly. He got a bit sloppy, and he buggered off to Paris to sort out some business, and he didn't close it down. And locals actually claim that he would throw a sacrificial sheep into the loch every Sunday for his pet Nessie. So he treated it as a pet. And he had the time and the resources to devote his pursuits of magical rituals. But he also talked about when he came back, a lot of his staff and a lot of the people close to him were dying and having problems. And there was a lot of phenomena in the house. And I think the local butcher, who was teetotal, who was delivering meat to the Crowley house, all of a sudden started drinking and cursing and rambling that he was possessed by the devil and things like this. So a lot of people were affected by the house when he left, with this portal still open.
And of course, Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin was the owner of the house for a long time, and he said that he experienced some quite remarkable things in that house. Now, he was also an occultist himself, and that wasn't unusual with the rock stars of that generation, like Bowie and Geezer Butler from Black Sabbath. They all dabbled in Thelema and the occult in general. And so there's that element of it, but I do like the concept of that being a haunted glen, or the glen itself, the glen that the loch is in, the long string of mountains in the Celtic world is often associated as being domains of the fairies. The Glen Shee, the Glen of the Shee, the Pula Puka, the pool of the Puka. They were all glens, and they were all associated with the fairies living in the bodies, in and around the bodies of water in the glen. So Crowley knew precisely where he was and why he was there, why it was ideal for the Aramel and the Mage. Another thing too is that I predicted a couple of years ago, as the restoration of Boleskine House took place, that sightings of Nessie would be more frequent, and absolutely they became much more frequent. In fact, of some fantastic sightings, like a guy in Ireland who studies Loch Ness constantly on cameras. They have cameras up around the lake. They recorded some incredible stuff that had happened there. And it was at the point where, like, they'd finished the foundations of Boleskine and were starting to put the walls up and this kind of thing. There's no doubt to me that that lake does have that. There's the monster is real, but it's not a dinosaur. There's no proof that they'd have found something by now. There's been so many dives in it, so many things, exploration to the bottom, really good, diving equipment and subs now, and they've never found anything to suggest that. Even though the water, I know, is black and peaty, they have all the equipment now to find the bones of a dinosaur, and they haven't found anything. And when they do, it's usually an old rotten tree or something floating in the lake or stuck at the bottom.
It's almost like the thing is self-camouflaging or self-concealing. So it can see you, but you can't see it, except on rare sightings, a bit like a kelpie. It could change into anything.
I saw, well, that's a very common thing in that kind of elemental thing. I saw a bit. I wish I knew who it was and where I could find it. About 20 years ago, I was watching daytime TV in Ireland. It was just some dopey magazine program that they have on in the afternoon, and hosted by a guy called David McWilliams. And one of the topics for that week was the paranormal. And a woman came on who had been filming her family somewhere up in Northern Ireland on a video camera, and the family are here, and then the shape of a human being starts moving like this, like pixelated, coming out of the ether, and she's going, "John, there's a ghost beside you," and they didn't see it. She saw it from her angle. The camera saw it, but the two people standing beside it didn't see it. Now that would suggest that it didn't want to be seen by them, it wanted to be seen to her. And of course, he said it was a ghost, but it could have been any kind of elemental spirit,
Well, I definitely think it goes beyond being a surviving dinosaur species or any kind of zoological animal. And I think it's a supernatural entity that resides in the water and was possibly brought here via that magical ritual. And it can travel backwards and forwards between this realm and its own. And it may like the Loch Ness area. And I've not come across any attacks on humans, have you?
No, and also you have these things that they're being lots of electronic equipment used to look for it, and they find nothing. Well, we know that these spiritual entities are very badly affected by electronic equipment, so they're actually using the devices that would destroy any possible sightings, because they're dealing with like a spiritual being.
From what I can see, or what I can conclude from reading about it, it lives there, minding its own business. And it's us that bother it, really, because it's not
Yeah.
caused anybody any harm.
No, and if you think about the lake is a perfect medium for it. Just like it's black, the water is pitch black. It's in a remote area. It's very much like the abyss. When you go if you go swimming in Loch Ness and put your head under the water, the peaty black water is instantaneously black. So it is like the earthly manifestation of the abyss. That's what bogs were considered to the ancient Celts. That's why when they sacrificed like criminals, they cut their throats and strangled them and threw them into the bog so they would never be reincarnated. They threw them into the abyss, and it would be like the abyss. So the thing would actually be it would be existing in the abyss, in a sort of a micro abyss of its own.
It's one of those topics where you have to be careful when you're reading about it and researching it. My advice would be to go and purchase a good book about the subject, rather than go rooting on the internet about it, because there's a lot of stuff on the internet that doesn't really give the full story, and there's a lot of so-called experts out there who poo-poo it as a hoax and think it's hilarious and find it funny. So I'd start off with books from some of the investigators, maybe from the 1970s, like Frederick Holliday, because he was very open-minded on the subjects, and he's a big advocate for it being some kind of a supernatural entity.
As they were in general in this, like that video I showed on the haunted house in England from the 1970s. These parapsychological experts were very open-minded. They weren't making fun of people. They were there to see if it was true or not, or what was true and what wasn't. Unfortunately, in the post Richard Dawkins age, it's all poo-poo. But also the instant assumption that it's a cryptid, that it's a surviving dinosaur. Yeah, well, you can easily say disprove that one, but that also distracts from other possibilities that like Bigfoot, it's a fairy or something like that, or an elemental. And of
Why?
course, there's lake monsters all over the world too. That's another one. They're very common. There's one in Lacon, not far from here in County Mayo. There's Lake Champlain. There's ones in British Columbia. They're everywhere, and they're all in large, deep bodies of water. And yet no one has captured one yet, just like Bigfoot. Why? Because they're not in this realm. We're just seeing their disturbance upon this realm.
What I found looking at it on the internet was to say that you believe that the Loch Ness Monster exists is tantamount to saying you believe in Father Christmas. And that's not really the kind of open-mindedness that I'm about, really. So I would go and buy a book, get a book.
Or if you can manage it, go to Loch Ness and explore the area, and just soak in the energies.
Yeah, but I believe it's real. I believe it's a spiritual entity that passes from this realm to its own realm, and it likes the water, it likes the area, and it's minding its own business.
Yep. And the best way to look for it is not with electronic equipment or any kind of machinery. Yep. I'm down with that. And that's the Loch Ness Monster. We'd love to hear what you think about it. And now we welcome once again our housemaid of the inner world, our psychinista, the cleaner of the psyche, the internal lower poles of cognition domestic goddess herself, Sara Mondaini, with the psychic hygiene.
So this week, I want to give you a really simple recommendation for looking after your psychic well-being. We all like to use social media, and we spend a lot of time looking into our screens. Well, this week, why not think about how much more we got done before the onset of social media? And as part of Thomas's operation to break free from this timeline, let's go back in our minds to September the 10th, 2001, a time when we would surf the internet to read and learn and check our emails now and then, a time when it hadn't consumed all aspects of society and it didn't dictate what we could and couldn't say and how to think. So just for one day, give your brain and your nervous system a break from the constant blue light and the deluge of information coming at you from your device. Consider a detox from the screen and use the internet like it's the early 2000s. If you're interested in something, read about it, send an email, and then turn it off and go and do something from the old world. Stick a DVD in the machine, watch an old comedy or an old film. Think about how much simpler and how less stressful it was when you weren't being bombarded with news, statistics, opinions, and tracking cookies. Pick up a physical book, read it, smell it, touch it. It's real and it's in your hand. It's yours. It's not something that you've rented from the cloud. Same with music. Play a CD. Enjoy reading the lyrics from the cover. Join the library. Take a book. Read it outside in the woods or in the back garden or even in a coffee shop and pay with cash. Take a bath, a walk, or a nap instead of scrolling. Take a piece of paper and a pen and write to a friend and surprise them with a real letter sent by snail mail. Take steps to learn a skill that you've always wanted to master. Start that book that you've always wanted to write. Have a technology tidy up and use the internet for the resource tool that it can be, rather than for scrolling down news feeds for hours. Limit yourself to certain times of the day and be more particular with the content that you consume. Feed your brain with quality content rather than mindless junk. You'll feel refreshed and you'll have helped to bring some of that old world back into the now. Being constantly distracted by screens and devices does nothing for our mind, body, or soul, except give the illusion of freedom while chaining ourselves to a digital prison. And that's my psychic well-being recommendation for this week.
Well, I agree completely with that one. And I like the idea, what you said about like doing things that you did back then, snail mail and so on. This is not so we got physically go back to those times, but we recapture the level of consciousness we had at that time before the assault had happened the following day, in 2001. The wave function is collapsing. We see it all the time. The echoes of those times are hitting back now in reverse or in different ways. So it seems like we've got a couple of more years, 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 or 5 at the most, but we can do it. But we start doing it now. We're building a lifeboat of consciousness to get us back to those times. So yes, sir, I couldn't agree more. I really feel that with all my heart, especially the things you said there about get an old album, read the sleeve notes, play it on a record player, things like that. And you're right about the internet. Back then, it was a lot more fun. It was tremendously. It was a wild, feral place, and you weren't being controlled. And I think that's really what we need to break away from, the control, that's imposed upon us. And it's like the devil card. Those chains are, you can easily just walk away. You may ask yourself, why am I holding a copy up of Anthropophacy today from winter 1995? Well, it's to introduce our third topic on Rudolf Steiner, the father of Anthropophacy, more commonly known today as spirit science or spiritual science. So I will let Sarah take it over from this point.
Rudolf Steiner was an Austrian philosopher. He was an artist, a social thinker, an architect, and an esoterist. He was born in 1861 on the 27th of February, so it's his birthday next week. He was a very psychic and sensitive child, and he could see the spirit realms very clearly from an early age. He was a learned man, and over the course of his life, he taught many fields of human pursuits. Things like art, architecture, drama, science, education, agriculture, medicine, economics, religion. There's almost no field that he didn't touch. He developed a way of thinking that he applied to different aspects of what it means to be human, and he formulated and taught a path of inner development, which he referred to as spiritual science. This philosophy, based on the idea that the human intellect has the ability to contact spiritual worlds, he suggested the existence of a spiritual world to that of pure thought, but fully accessible only to potential knowledge that's latent in all humans. He regarded human beings as having participated in the spiritual processes of the world through a dreamlike consciousness, and he claimed that an enhanced consciousness can perceive these spiritual worlds. He attempted to develop a means for spiritual seeing that was independent of the senses. So he founded the Anthroposophical Society in 1912. It's based in Dornach in Switzerland, and it now has branches around the world. Steiner said, "Thinking is no more and no less an organ of perception than the eye or the ear. Just as the eye perceives colours and the ear sounds, so thinking perceives ideas." A consistent thread that runs through his early philosophical phrase right through to his later spiritual orientation is the goal of demonstrating that there are no essential limits to human knowledge. Now, since the teacher's death in 1925, there is an almost unknown growing movement around the world, bringing practical solutions to the problems of our global technological civilization. And Steiner's seeds that he planted back then are now coming to fruition through thousands of his projects infused with human values. One of the most phrased questions that I've heard over the last few years is, what does Rudolf Steiner think about this? What does Rudolf Steiner think about that? What does he have to say about this? And I discovered him through the lockdown when I was trying to make sense of what could be happening in the world. And I came across some of his teachings that were relevant to what was being forced on us. And I found a really interesting piece, which I'll read to you, regarding the transubstantiation of the you-know-what. More than 100 years ago, Rudolf Steiner wrote the following: "In the future, we will eliminate the soul with medicine. Under the pretext of a healthy point of view, there will be what Thomas is holding in the on the screen now, by which the human body will be treated as soon as possible, directly at birth, so that the human being cannot develop the thought of existence of soul and spirit. Materialistic doctors will be entrusted the task of removing the soul of humanity. As today, people are what Thomas is holding in his hand against this disease or that disease, so in the future, children will be with a substance that can be produced precisely in such a way that people, thanks to this substance, will be immune to being subjected to the madness of spiritual life. He would be extremely smart, but he would not develop a conscience, and that is the true goal of some materialistic circles. With such a needlecraft, you can easily make the etheric body loose in the physical body. Once the etheric body is detached, the relationship between the universe and the etheric body would become extremely unstable, and man would become an automation, for the physical body of man must be polished on this earth by spiritual will. And so the needlecraft becomes a kind of Ahrimanic force man can no longer get rid of. Given a materialistic feeling, he becomes a materialistic constitution, and he will no longer be able to rise to the spiritual. Rudolf Steiner. And the minute I saw that, I became an instant fan. And
yeah,
you can...
Jason Heppenstall did a fantastic article on that during that period too. Rudolf Steiner first came onto my radar. Well, I heard about him going back years, but I didn't know much about him except he was Austrian, and he was very from the sort of like Christian Gnosticism revival thing. But that was all I knew. But he really came onto my radar proper when I was researching for the book Walpurgis Night, and I read this speech by Adolf Hitler. I came across this speech by Adolf Hitler in the early days of the National Socialists, attacking this thing called anthropophagy, and Rudolf Steiner. Now, at that time, there's an interesting history of Germany from the late 1800s into the National Socialist period, where there was a real battle for the soul of Germany going on. You had all kinds of like spiritual revivalist movements. You had Ariosophy, you had Armament, you had the Volkisch movement, and you had later on Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophy, which he actually created when he broke from theosophy over this belief that Krishnamurti was basically the new Jesus Christ. And he felt that the American version of theosophy, the American school of theosophy, was very cultish. So you really, when you start looking at Steiner, you really get into sort of like a deep dive into the Germanic soul in many ways. He was a scholar at a very young age. He was a scholar of Goethe, and the whole concept of Goethe's influence upon German culture, which we in the English-speaking world would have a hard time understanding how deep that strand runs. And he's actually written a few books on Goethe, including one on his color theory, his concepts of color theory, and also the Germanic philosophers such as Nietzsche. He was a remarkable man in that he had a very complex academic education. And he studied both hard science. He believed in hard science, but he also believed that those science and spirituality worked together. Like he subscribed to Darwin's theory of evolution, but said that there was more to it. The impetus was the self-generation of the human consciousness. He was a great believer that human consciousness was human beings. You manifested yourself into existence. You had this biodynamic aspect to you that brought you into being. You weren't an accident, and neither was humanity. When I was researching into him, it was very interesting that some of the National Socialist leaders actually kind of looked up to him, particularly Rudolf Hess, but that all ended when he went to Scotland and was captured. But Hitler couldn't stand him, and the more thuggish elements, such as the brown shirts, the SA, would do things like raid his meetings and throw in stink bombs and things like this and try to beat him up. So that's how powerful he was becoming. It was a genuine worry to the more extremist elements of the National Socialists. He also appealed to some of them in that he once said that European civilization and European man is the highest expression of humanity in the world. But then he finished up by saying that we would also be wiped. We'd also be replaced one day. So it's not, we're just that now. There's an ongoing evolution. He also mentioned that Judaism was basically a spent religion in the world, and Judaism had its best thing for that to do would be to assimilate itself into Germanic culture, which it actually did until, unfortunately, the raising up of the National Socialists. And so he was a controversial figure, but really not because of what he did or said, but because of associations that were sometimes thrown at him. He was kind of made this way. Also, but there's no doubting that his influence is enormous. He was approached at one time by the Lutheran and priests from the Lutheran and Catholic Church to ask him to develop a new form of Christianity, a new philosophy of Christianity, which he actually did. We helped them, but they did it, but he actually helped them. And he was a believer that in the concept that Jesus Christ existed more in the, not so much in the synoptic gospels as a person, but more as a kind of a spiritual being that's called Christ consciousness. That's why he's in the New Age. So much of it has adopted so much of his thing, but without like a typical New Age style, they don't really understand what they're saying or really talking about. This concept of the Freya Christus, the new Christ, was actually also basically co-opted and bastardized by the National Socialists. Well, not the National Socialists, but their predecessors and things like the Thule Society. The history of Germany at that time is just amazing, and Austria, just amazing. It really was like a philosophical, spiritual, cauldron in Central Europe. But his legacy is just phenomenal. The whole concept of things about education, where it helped the Steiner schools and how they're put about. But for me, I think, aside from the fact that his belief was that spirituality and the practical material world go hand in hand, I'm really taken in by his concepts of agriculture, which actually are still very influential in the world today, and the concept of biodynamic farming, which was actually even adopted in countries like Ireland when we first started out. The idea that you didn't need chemical pesticides, that everything on the farm was a self-fulfilling organism. Manure became fertilizer, weeds became animal feed. And this was actually took off a big time in Germany and was very big to the whole organic farming movement, even to this day. Very inspiring to hippies in America, and was proven that it could be done on a vast scale. And the German farmers who adopted his biodynamic agricultural system were able to produce vast quantities of food using his method. There was always a belief that it could only be, small holding cottage gardens. But no, he actually proved you could do it on a large scale and actually feed towns and cities. And so he's been extremely influential in the kind of organic farming world, and that kind of thing, as well as the development of the arts and the concept of arts being a higher force for human consciousness. And Steiner's stuff only becomes more relevant, like they were saying there about the he was right. He was talking about soulless droids. Well, that's the NPCs, isn't it? That's the NPCs. And we've seen personality changes in people since then, haven't we all? That their vital spark has been, I know several people that their vital sparks have been switched off by that. And so I would say that we're only beginning in the English-speaking world to fully appreciate Steiner, as if the actual last 3 years were a kind of a seed, because he's still not very well known outside the Germanic-speaking world, where he's like kind of almost like he's like almost like a Buddha type character. But his legacy is now really hitting the English-speaking world as a concept of two things: first, the organic farming, and then what he wrote about this thing, and how it was shown to be the truth, that we were a spiritual war, that there was forces of darkness. He also produced Lucifer magazine. He was the first one to actually popularize the concept of Lucifer. It was Lucifer and Earth, or something like that magazine was called. It was in German. And it took the theosophy idea of Lucifer as being like the being of enlightenment. And within theosophy, the belief was, and an Ariosophy, one of the other things that were struggling to take up, find dominance in Germany back in those days, that Lucifer was the god of this world, as opposed to the God of the universe, and the existence of mankind, the formulation, the creation of the being, of the person, was a self-generating organism built from a spiritual revolt when Lucifer challenged Yahweh, or whatever that thing is called. And this is fantastic stuff when you start getting into it. And the legacy continues to this day. And he's written 40 books on everything from art to farming to Goethe's color theory, as well as numerous essays on Nietzsche, Kant, and Goethe. And just about everything has been translated into English. It's freely available on the internet, but get the hard book copies. Like years ago, I used to read Anthroposophy Today, and that was generally made up of essays where people within the movement cited Steiner's work in the present, like you did earlier on with this thing. In the early 90s, it was very much about what was happening in Yugoslavia. And so it tied into I gained a lot from reading this journal back in the day. And so I totally get what you said as soon as you read that, because he has that effect on people. Even things like I've got it there, Krishnamurti's bio. Krishnamurti was basically whipped up as a kind of a new Jesus type figure by the likes of Ledbetter and people like that in theosophy. But there was also a kind of a creepy kind of pederast thing going on as well, a kind of a sex thing that Steiner definitely saw. And Krishnamurti, when he was an adult, said, yeah, Steiner was right about that. So yeah, a man who's constantly proven right is Rudolf Steiner.
There's a fabulous YouTube channel, and I will put it in the description. And the Steiner Society have turned all of his essays and many of his books and lectures into audio form. It's a really good service what they've done, bringing it to audio form like that, because it's nice to have the book, like you say, but it's also nice to have it read to you as well. I sometimes find it goes in more if somebody's saying it to you. And he's all over the internet. His stuff is really accessible, and he's known by some as the best kept secret of the 20th century.
Yeah, the thing is, again, it's a Germanic thing. We in the Anglosphere, the English-speaking world, we haven't had the same exposure to them. And I'm a great believer in absorbing yourself in a different philosophical tradition, whether it be Japanese or Chinese or whatever. And the Germanic one, the Steiner one, is an ideal one to dive into because it's still European, it's still culturally similar, but the Germanic sort of spiritual soul is a different thing again. I found that I understood the history of Europe better, even knowing about that. Like he said that Germany was heading for destruction under the National Socialists, but he also said it was probably a thing that was fated to happen. And, like basically that was what he was talking about. Like the German society was considered the most civilized society in the world until it all fell apart so quickly. And a lot of it had to do with industrialization and warfare, the unification of Germany under Bismarck, and this constant desire to go to war and military expansion. That was a big thing. The German Empire was a big part in its own downfall. It was almost like Germany was a power when it wasn't an empire. When it became an empire, it became the material side and the spiritual side of Goethe and Kant and all that other kind of thing just dissipated away, and ultimately wrecked them.
Yeah, if you've not read any Rudolf Steiner, I really recommend getting some Rudolf Steiner into your life, especially as we go through these uncertain times. There's a strange comfort in what he says, and you can relate to so much of it, and you think, yeah, it just resonates with you.
And if you're interested in growing vegetables in your backyard, you'll love his stuff on biodynamic gardening and food production. You'll absolutely love that.
Yeah, there's something for everybody in that body of work. Yeah. If you can't wait to get started on Rudolf Steiner, you can find a lot of his books and essays, all free in the public domain via Gutenberg.org.
And along with the Gutenberg Library, Sarah, there's also tremendous essays and criticism of his work written by British and American writers who sometimes it can feel complicated for a person who grew up speaking English, even the English translations, because it comes from that Germanic consciousness that was probably from like old Plattendeutsch, the old German. What you need to so these essays often break down these philosophies into a more sort of easier digestible form for people from like the Anglosphere.
I will put the links in the description for people so they can go straight there and have a look. Is it cloudy? Is it clear? Can we put the umbrellas away? Is the barometer predicting smooth or stormy psychic weather this week? Do we need a big coat, or will a jacket do? So many questions. Let's find out the answers as we go over to Thomas for this week's psychic weather.
Psychic weather this week is anger. There's tremendous anger and tension out there. I'm seeing it everywhere. It manifested over the weekend and it's bubbling along. There's a lot of people wound up and tense, a lot of people agitated online, a lot of people edgy and touchy and jumpy. And there's a certain sense of uncertainty. Now, I know in many ways anxiety is kind of like a force that rules the world right now in big time. But I guess what makes us like in the tribes a little happier is that we don't buy into these mainstream things. But even I'm seeing this kind of anger and tension among tribe members too. Look, there's something causing it. I don't know what it is, but there's a sense of anger. Again, we have to be like almost like Zen masters with this stuff and keep it with, keep ourselves tempered. Our emotions can be very damaging to ourselves in any direction. You'll find that even if you're giddy, you'll be ultra giddy. If you're angry, you'll be ultra angry. There's almost like it's difficult for people to put the brakes on their emotions right now, but it's all seems to be around tension and anger. So don't blow up at the boss in work. Don't start screaming at the kids. Don't be banging the car horn and screaming it. Let it process through you and dissipate, because that's one of the biggest mistakes in your life are usually done during times like this. So that's the psychic weather this week for me, Thomas. Anger is in abundance, and this is when the Zen master inside you has to rise to the top. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. So don't be like a pressure cooker and blow all at once. Maybe find something to do that's relaxing, take your mind off it, something calming. Go and read a Rudolf Steiner book.
Yeah, find that safety valve.
Yes, just let off steam gradually, slowly, so you're not outbursting at everybody and blowing off. Yeah. Totally.
Okay, now a part of the show that I'm really starting to enjoy, because I'm going back through my vast library of books and finding stuff I haven't looked at in years, and we're able to share it with you. And this is the book, not the review, but there are 14 books that made this life more interesting for us. And I think, Sarah, you should introduce the first book this week.
Well, this week, my book is Rivals of the Ripper by Jan Bonderson. And it's a book containing stories of unsolved murders of women in mid to late Victorian London. And the crimes in this book occurred before the Ripper struck. But he was one of just many phantom murderers whose unsolved slayings seemed to take place in Victorian Britain. And now in this book, there's stories about the mysterious Great Coram Street, Burton Crescent, and Euston Square murders, and they were all talked about with bated breath. And the northern part of Bloomsbury got the unflattering nickname of the murder neighbourhood, thanks to all the unsolved mysteries there. Now, I'm a bit fascinated with it because there seems to be a lot of spectral killers of gaslit London around the 1800s, especially during Victoria's reign. And the victims were always women, and they usually met the same gory ending. Now, if you like historical crime, you will love this book. But if you're like me and your little Fortean heart thinks there's something inherently wrong around London from that time, then you're going to read this book from a much deeper perspective. Some of the unsolved cases are no doubt committed by chancers, but some of them are chillingly similar to the Ripper, who didn't start his killing spree until around 1888. And the crimes in this book start about 20 years prior to this. Now, this book raised a few questions for me. Could Jack the Ripper have started sooner than was reported? Could he have been influenced, or was he copycatting some of the crimes in this book? Or was there some supernatural entity going around attacking young women during this time? Now, the book doesn't take the Fortean aspects into account, but it is an interesting read, and it's even more so when you read it from that perspective. And around this time, there were also many tales of Spring-Heeled Jack, who we talked about on a previous show, and he went around terrorising and attacking women out on their own. And he even went so far as knocking on the doors to get them to come outside, and then he'd be seen jumping onto the rooftops of houses to make his escape. And a lot of cases in this book tell of killers who were nowhere to be seen and couldn't be identified. And those that may have been seen before the crime were certainly never seen again afterwards. It's a great book, and it's full of old photographs and pencil drawings. If you can see that there, pencil drawings of the areas and of the crime scenes around London town. It's chilling and it's dark, but if you have an inquisitive mind, it does tend to raise more questions than I think the book intended. It's worth a read, especially if you're intrigued by the darkness that seemed to surround Victorian London.
That's definitely one I'd be interested in myself. I had no idea that there was other similar killers to Jack the Ripper. You wonder if the prudishness or the repression of Victorian society actually generated these as reactive forces, these sex killers as kind of reactive forces at a time when it was like, if a woman showed her ankle, it was considered scandalous. You wonder if that was a reaction to that. I'm going to check out that one. That one's very interesting. I had no idea that was clusters of those things in London. There's something very spooky about London in that age. My book this week is The Fortune-Telling Book by Raymond Buckland. It's an encyclopedia, basically, and it's a great one. It's basically in alphabetical form, telling you about every kind of fortune-telling method that you could put out there. Now, Buckland was a big shot in the development of the popularity of witchcraft growth in America. He's a Wiccan. Again, I'll read book by Christians if they're good, so don't let that get past you. He's also a gypsy seer. And the book is basically jam-packed, not only with stuff to do with divination, every mancy under the sun, necromancy, cardmancy, aeromancy, but candlemancy, but also it's an encyclopedia of characters involved in it. So it's a great Fortean book to get into the occult, everyone from Joan of Arc to John Dee to Alice White to Crowley. They're all in here. They're all mentioned, and little brief bios of them. And in fact, my interest into the sort of pagan concepts of Joan of Arc actually originated me in reading this book. It is absolutely jam-packed, and it's full with endless illustrations on things like magic squares. There's Hindu magic, Buddhism magic. There's even things like Etruscan magic, all ancient Roman magic. Everything is listed now, not in comprehensive form, but enough to introduce you to the topic, written in very clear and concise ways. Very, very well illustrated, and it can often be found picked up on the cheap and secondhand stores. I don't know why that is, but it's a good, it's really attractive. Well, this one is ripped to bits, but it's a really attractive looking book with the cover and everything. It opens like a music album almost. So if you want a book that it's just a basic interest into tarot, dowsing, the characters involved in the occult, in an encyclopedic, very accessible, very easy to navigate form, with big index, very useful always. This is the one. This is a great. I would actually say that this is a must-have for your Fortean library. So the fortune-telling book by Raymond Buckland is not just about seering, soothsaying, divination. It's really a very compact thing. I believe he was a regular contributor to Fortean Times, and a lot of photos used in it are from the Fortean Library. So it couldn't be more suitable for this show. And people who like this show, if you're interested in the topics, this is kind of like a must-have book for your Fortean library. And you can often pick them up quite inexpensively on eBay and things like that. So I highly recommend the fortune-telling book, the Encyclopedia of Divination and Soothsaying by Raymond Buckland.
I want that book.
Oh, you love it. It's great.
I need that book. I was absolutely riveted listening to you talk about that. That's perfect for reading, for having on the coffee table, having on the bookshelf, taking into the loo with you. Just take it.
That's where it is with me when I go to the bog. Yeah.
Just open it up at any page, and I bet it's fascinating.
Yeah, and it's very well written and easy to follow.
Okay, we've come to that time of the show now where it's time to say goodnight and to say thank you for joining us this Sunday and for keeping it strange. Please remember to like and share this video far and wide. We couldn't do it without your support. Please keep your comments coming in. Any stories that you have to share with us, put them in the comments. Any thoughts on the books or any of the topics that we've discussed tonight, put them in the comments. They will get read. Any suggestions for future topics, put them in the comments. If you've got any location reports that you want to submit to us, contact either Thomas or myself, and we'll look into that. And just keep sharing us, because the more you share us, the wider an audience we can reach, and you're our only form of advertising. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks everybody for being here, joining us on this Sunday night exploration into high strangeness. And we'll see you in episode 9 of Hocus Focus next Sunday night. Thanks very much. Thank you, Sarah.
And that episode 9 will be on Beyond Room 313 next week. So make sure,
313,
yeah, if you're not subscribed already, go and get subscribed. If you are subscribed, make sure you hit the notification bell so you don't miss an episode. Good night.
Good night.